My thought is really to objectively understand who you are and where you can fit in the market. And if it aligns to your belief and your purpose and your mission, then that's really the wonderful start point. And everything just flows out of that quite wonderfully.
Hello there, and welcome back to the My Future Business Show. As you know, my name's Rick Nusky, and for those who actually are here for the first time, welcome to the show. I'm not sure how you found us, but I know that you're in for a treat today because on today's show, I have the pleasure of welcoming author, president, and brand strategist at Vyoo Brand and Content, Mr. Henry Wong. Welcome to the show, Henry.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, Rick. It's a real pleasure to connect with you.
Yes, absolutely. A pleasure to have you here. Now, you and I today, we're going to be talking about leadership, storytelling, and your latest book, Telling Your Story, Building Your Brand. I love the title of that book, and we're going to take a deep dive into that. But first and
It's a bit
foremost,
of a mouthful, isn't it?
oh no, look, I practiced it a couple of times and I had it down. No problems at all. So, where are you calling in from today, Henry?
Toronto, Canada.
Beautiful. Tell us a little bit about what you love about the place.
I think for times like today where we have a lot of snow and cold, I do wish I was in warmer temperatures, but as the seasons change, it really, you really enjoy the changing of the guard, the changing of the sun. So it's really where life and family is here. So it's a little bit hard to move off of that.
Yeah, so do you have to do you embrace sort of hobbies that are to do with snow and things like that? Because I love the cold weather myself.
Yeah, true, very true. So, in the past, everything from tobogganing to skiing, of course, but these days, because of the focus on business, most of the activities are indoors. I'm quite a bit of a wheel nut, meaning that I love anything on wheels. So,
Oh,
bicycling, motorcycling, cars. So, the winter months are actually spent gearing up for that. Readying a vehicle, tuning the car, tuning the motorcycle. Very, very enjoyable. And I think for a lot of listeners, they probably can identify with that because you use your brain so much through the day. It's really nice to be able to do something mechanical and turn your brain off and just focus on that for a while.
isn't it amazing how you have to be in that singular moment, Henry? When you're on a push bike, there's nothing else that you're thinking about. How important is that for you to, to have that single train of thought occasionally?
I think you're absolutely right. There's just so many thoughts, and like many people, you have ideas running constantly through the head, and it's wonderful to be able to just, put on a helmet and sort of zen out and just focus on nothing but the road and just empty your thoughts. It's very meditative, and I think for anybody in a leadership position, being able to empty your mind like that so you can focus on things when you get back to it is just a wonderful remedy for all that ails you.
I love it, love that. Now, tell me a little bit about your most favorite motorbike. What style of bike is it? Being a biker myself, I actually like cruisers, or are you a sports bike type of guy?
A little bit more, yeah, city and sports bike. So I got my motorcycle license probably about 20 years ago, or legally got it 20 years ago. And I like the Ducati so much, I
Oh.
decided to buy that, but it was probably too big of a, too powerful of a bike for me. And I remember the first time going out in the parking lot and I go, oh my goodness, what have I done?
There, there
It was
used to
just
there used to be this departure from the colours that Ducati used to have. Their rich red, and there was a time I recall they were trying to explore different colours. How many different colours did they have? Did they have a yellow Ducati?
They do, yeah.
Yeah.
In my initial, I've had two Ducatis now, and the first one was black, and I was a little bit hesitant to get a bright red one, which I currently have now. But at the same time, I realized there's quite a bit of a safety feature built into a bright color that
Oh
people
yeah.
can see you.
Yeah, there's definitely that beautiful, rich sound that comes out of a Ducati as well. Oh my
Oh yeah.
goodness.
Are you still riding, Rick?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually ride a Honda, but don't tell anybody. I'm a little bit embarrassed. I'd like to upgrade, but they're not. They're actually quite a good bike. They're quite reliable, I've found. But
Very reliable. I have friends who have ones from the 80s and they're still going strong, so you can do no wrong with them.
absolutely, yeah, I love this call. I love taking a deep dive into the things that you enjoy doing. I wonder about sports. Do you? One thing that comes to mind is ice hockey. Is that something that you enjoy over there? What's your thing?
Unfortunately, my roots were we weren't a particularly well-off family initially, and so my family couldn't, my mother and father couldn't afford the hockey equipment that typically is very expensive. But I did play a lot of hockey, and it was the in the backyard where we made our own rinks, poured water in, ran the hose from the house, and kept it, and just played with the neighborhood kids. And I think that's true of many Canadians. You really become part of the winter scene when you don a pair of ice skates and get out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, tell us a little bit about music and movies. Is there anything that takes your fancy?
I'm unfortunately for my wife, one of these people who just enjoys every type of genre, and particularly in film. So I will watch the schlockiest B movie, something with Nicolas Cage, to very high concept movies, very much like along the lines of a Christopher Nolan,
Yes.
a bit of storytelling. And I think that's really what it comes down to, isn't it? If it's a good story, it really doesn't
Yes,
matter
sir.
what sort of form it takes.
Variety is the spice of life, that's for sure. And certain now,
Yeah.
talking about spices of life, I was doing my research and I came across a favorite food, or what I think might be a favorite food for you. But you need to tell me about it because I'm not sure what it is. What is kimchi?
Oh, okay. So that is happens to be a brand that I'm assisting currently right now. Kimchi is, so if you know sauerkraut, it's really the Korean version of sauerkraut.
Ah,
So
there you go.
a fermented cabbage that has wonderful probiotics that help stimulate your gut health. But for many people in the Asian culture, it's just a nice way to add some spice and flavor to existing foods or as a bit of an appetizer.
Yeah, wow. Well, there you go. Do you have any other favorite foods that you enjoy with your wife?
Well, these days it's a lot of ramen, and
Ramen?
we did a ramen tour of Japan, so we quite enjoyed that. But I'm currently also doing a dual role as chief marketing officer of a ramen company based in the U.S. And every week, every day, every second day, I'm consuming some form of noodle or not. So you would think by now I'm quite tired of it, but
No?
and we'll perhaps get into the story behind it, of course.
Yeah.
But there's just something quite enjoyable and soothing and comforting about a bowl of soup and
Oh,
noodles.
yes, absolutely. And we will shift gears once we've gone through this first stage of the call to talk about more of those things. But I'd love to talk a little bit about your childhood. Can you recall a fond memory growing up that you could share with us?
I think it was my father worked a lot, but I do recall whenever he came home, even though it was late at night, he was very present and played with us and joked with us, and that I think is beyond any sort of toys or sports activities we had. Just that time with my father, and I think like many people who become of a certain age, when your parent passes on, you do recall hopefully the best of these memories.
Oh, yeah.
But he did shape a lot of my being today, and I'm quite appreciative of really not so much the guidance because he wasn't always there, but just the example he set. And I think back on one instance in which as a little boy, I found a ball in the middle of the road, and I brought it home, and I was so excited I said to my dad, "Look what I found! Look what I found! A ball!" Because I didn't have one. I was so happy that I could potentially keep it, and he told me to put it back on the road.
Oh,
And I was devastated. I thought, well, why can't I thought, life was finders, keepers, losers, weepers. That
yeah,
was the
yeah.
mentality I had been sort of attuned to from other kids. But he framed it not because it was right or that was the thing I should do. He said, that little boy or girl might come back for it at another point, and you wouldn't want him to be missing it, would you? So that to me gave me the reason to understand why you do certain things. And it was such a valuable lesson, that of thinking of others rather than thinking of yourself. And so the ball went back, and I didn't bear any bad or ill will whatsoever.
Yeah, but you learnt that lesson, like you said, Henry, and that, you carry those lessons through the years and then you pass them on in some way, shape, or form. I wonder, also, were there other people in those formative years that helped you become the person you've become today? Mentors and the likes?
Yeah, I certainly think so. I mean, certainly, I grew up in a fairly rough neighborhood, so I could have deviated very easily to the dark side and lived a life of crime like some of the kids. But
Yep.
I think as you sort of maintain this sort of moral fiber, you look upon life that way. I was very fortunate in that growing up in advertising that I did have mentors, because there wasn't a mentoring system the way we have now, where you can formalize and connect with people on a matchmaking service of sorts to get a mentor. Those days, you really, if people took you under your wing, you became their apprentice.
Yep.
And that's how I learned the craft of advertising, through some of the greats themselves, people who were quite renowned in the industry, who took the time to spend with me and teach me the ropes and get me thinking in a different way. And for that, I'm forever thankful, because it really mapped out my career and my what bit of success I have today.
Great feedback. Thank you very much. Now, I'm wondering if you could just share for context, I guess, your educational and your professional background with the audience.
Very different from where many people who end up in advertising and branding come from all walks of life. And myself, I've hired people from those walks of life, everyone from musicians to taxi drivers, who've just become wonderful, creative people. My own training really came from the media side, training in media, double degree in film. I did my thesis on Kung Fu films and the like. Again, nothing whatsoever to do with the life I'm leading now. But what it did do was give me a certain discipline to finish, a degree, 2 degrees,
Yep.
and begin to move on that way. But the real education for this sort of life begins just by doing. What you can learn from people, the actual practical knowledge that you gain working on campaigns and working on strategy was fantastic. Eventually I was decent enough where I eventually became creative director of Saatchi and Saatchi in Canada. And with that, of course, there is built-in training. I learned a lot about planning and strategy, and
Yep.
formalized courses that they had people take. And in many ways, that again helped to further shape me. But I think if you're open and you're curious, I think you can learn anything along the way just by picking up things from people.
That's great feedback. Now, I always think about what I'm going to do in my life. I'm wondering, do you have a bucket list and what's in it?
I think that bucket list is forever going on
It's
for
changing.
me. Yeah, I think there's so much to see in this world, and you come across different people, and that activates a different sort of call to action to get to another place. But I think when I, for example, look to hire people, I see if they're open to travel, if they've done a lot of that, and
Yep.
I think that certainly is the best education in life for anybody, just to open your eyes to the way other people see things and live, and it creates an openness in yourself. So my bucket list is to really just to continue to do this.
Do what you're
At
doing.
one point, yeah, at one point I did joke a lot about just to being able to get to a point where I can simply goof off and do nothing. But I think a lot of that really has to do with the amount of work and volume that's happening. But I have a feeling that as long as we become older, that intellectual stimulation, no matter what you do, maybe the idea isn't to retire. The idea is to keep active, at least from an intellectual side,
Yes.
so that you can, yeah,
Well, it's a
absolutely.
very interesting point that you make, because I often think about this when people retire from roles. They often stop. Their entire life goes away because they don't continue to set goals. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think a constant check on things. One of the things I do is I try to learn something new every season, and I think that in itself is an objective that certainly keeps my mind active, and
Hmm.
hopefully as I get into these senior years, it
Yes.
will find a way to keep my brain or body active in some way.
Yeah, fantastic feedback. Loving this call. Now let's shift gears a little bit now, Henry, and
For
tell us a
sure.
bit about the Vyoo brand.
Mm. So a number of years ago, I guess about 7 years ago, post working with the bigger agencies, I began to form smaller agencies with different partners.
Mm.
In one agency incarnation, I had an older partner, and unfortunately, he passed away, and his symptoms were Alzheimer related. So, towards the end, he was unfortunately not of sound mind.
Mm.
At that point, I decided to do a little bit of a reset on the way I approached business because it was quite sad to see a wonderful man pass away like that.
Yeah.
So I started this company called Vyoo that would purely focus on high impact companies, meaning that I decided I only want to work with organizations and companies that want to have a positive impact on society. And that in itself, I thought, would be a little bit of a retirement type of business where less people would be interested in working with me. I could taper back. Funny enough, the opposite happened
Opposite is
where
true.
yeah, yeah, and it also gravitated a lot of wonderful team players to come on board, because they saw a vision of where I was taking this company and the type of work that we would do and have a positive impact on society ourselves as a result. So that in itself has led to many wonderful opportunities, and I think it told me as well how important purpose is in formulating both the intent of your company, but also in the stories that you tell, in the method by which you share the stories about yourself.
It's the backbone to everything that is. Now, before we start talking about that directly, tell us a little bit about the brands and different personalities that you've worked with, because I know that the list is fairly impressive.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, from my roots and that I was quite fortunate in having the ability or the opportunity to work with very large brands like Toyota and Procter and Gamble. That really helped to form a certain discipline. But more importantly, over the years, it's a lot of the smaller companies that I've been witness to fantastic growth and being able to rocket to large size proportions. I've taken the same sort of discipline for branding and I've applied it to personal uh, brands as well, or people brands, as I call it. And that's helped them catapult themselves as founders. So it's been in the fintech world, it's been in, amongst the sports field, even politics
Yep.
itself. I do have an NDA with a lot of them in terms of being this whisper in the background. So I,
Yep.
some names I can
Of
mention,
course.
some I can't, but
Yep.
it's been a wonderful journey in terms of applying, these large brand disciplines to people in itself. And I think that's what obviously led to the writing of my book, to be able to share some of this knowledge for people who may not be able to have access to this sort of thinking and discipline to maybe manifest their own brand, personal brand, as it relates to their company.
Yeah, I'd love to look at the correlation between, well, first of all, it's a two-part question, the difference between that personal brand and a business brand and the relationship that it has with the ability to lead.
I like to think of it not being different in that way because the
Right.
same sort of discipline, the same sort of positioning in the market, the way you focus on the key message, the way you enact the message and get it out through different media are one and the same.
Right.
Where they can run into some disconnect is often when the founder has one personality, one brand, but the brand begins taking on another form. And that's where the disharmony can sometimes happen. So the founder of a business can, the company takes a shape of his personality and they're one and the same. They become one and the same brand. Often at times you inject somebody or the company grows beyond perhaps what the founder has set out to do and it takes on a different form. And that's where often there's a disconnect and you often hear amongst employees and staff, well, this isn't the company I had signed on with initially. And that's often what happens when you begin deviating from that sort of core purpose of what the organization is all about.
So I'm wondering, how is it that somebody can go about building their personal brand? Is there a particular process that goes on behind the background?
Oh, absolutely. And it really starts with taking stock of who you are, really taking an audit of yourself. So if we're talking from whether it's a personal brand or a product brand,
Hmm.
it becomes that initial bit of research that you do to understand what you stand for, what
Yep.
the strengths of the product, the weaknesses. So the same thing applies to the person. And so the tendency of many people, particularly founders, is they have one view of themselves, and that's themselves. The process I run people through is to take into account other people's views, their colleagues, their friends, their family, so that we can get a full picture. Because our viewpoint of ourselves is often, somewhat tainted or perhaps wrapped up in things that are perhaps a little bit rosy.
Yep.
But that's okay too. I think many people succeed as a result of being somewhat deluded in believing they can succeed. And when they do it, of course, it works out. But
Yeah, of course.
but it all ties together. So that first part is really taking stock of the who and what you are, and being able to compile that and assess it against all the different touch points of how you might be interpreted by people. Once you have that understanding, you can gain some insight in what makes you special and unique in your marketplace. From that, we look at the positioning and how you stack up against the competition,
Yep.
and how do we express it now as a key message. So there's a number of sort of exercises that I run people through to get to that key message. And once you decide that, only then do you decide, and this works especially with product brands, of course,
Yep.
only then do you decide to manifest anything creatively. The logo comes, or the slogan comes, or the advertising concepts come once you've determined that sort of positioning and key message. Because if you do that at the end or backwards, then you're really just using more of a subjective view to determine where you are. Yeah, my thought is really to really fully objectively understand who you are and where you can fit in the market. And if it aligns to your belief and your purpose and your mission, then that's really the wonderful start point, and everything just flows out of that quite wonderfully.
When I hear the word storytelling, I often think about those early days of my grandparents reading me books all those years ago. And it seems to me that every single interaction we have, even if we recognize it or not, Henry, we're telling stories, aren't we?
We are, and when I think it fits a certain sort of format that appeals to you, it is just a wonderful reinforcement of that story. So I think for a lot of people, they often wonder, well, should I tell the same story again and again? Aren't people tired of it? But you provide a wonderful example, particularly as a young child. There was no shortage of attention that you had for the same story over and over again, because you love the ending, you
Oh,
love the
yeah.
way it carried out. And this is true. We all know the story of Steve Jobs, for example. We know the story of how Elon Musk ascended and other sort of very prominent figures, but we never tire of hearing it because it seems to fit in something that reinforces our own belief system.
Yeah, I love this. The fact that we're, really focusing in on the ability to tell stories really dovetails nicely into my next question because it's about elevator pitches and pitch decks. I wonder if you can just explain the relationship between storytelling and those two things.
I think once you understand what the essence of your story is, it needs to permeate through all these different touch points. So a pitch deck, whether you're vying for an influx of cash into the company, or your elevator pitch when you're out networking or meeting people for the same time, it should all really stem from the same message that you have. So once you understand what it is, what you're all about, and what purpose you serve, that story becomes very, very easy. But it does need to permeate every aspect of what you do, whether it's through the interpretation of the use of colors on ads or the logo, whether it's that key headline that you have, whether it's simply the way you engage with people. It all comes back to that, and it constantly is reinforced. There may be different ways of sharing it and telling it, but in the end, it becomes the same message.
Same message.
And that's where that strength of consistency comes, that you're able to build a powerful brand, because that's really what a brand does. It's a consistently strong message that connects very well with people.
I think about authenticity and our ability to be true to ourselves when we tell stories. So I wonder, is it okay to tell both the good side of our story and the bad sides?
I think that's partly where likely a professional or even someone who's well attuned to their story can answer that question. Because sometimes showing the bad side or the challenges you face can create a very strong empathy with your audience. And hearing that they want to see you do well. On the other hand, sometimes sharing that bit of information can turn people off. So it really depends on how well you know your audience, and that's really key. Know thy audience, know
Yep.
what the expectation might be and what you can wade into. And this is why we often see with politicians, they don't want to alienate anybody, so they try to be everything to everybody,
Everyone.
and sometimes end up being nothing to nobody. So, I think for a lot of our listeners, particularly those who are succeeding in business, you can define who that audience is. In the end, you cannot be everything to everybody. It's just not possible, but you can be the right thing to the right audience. And if you, are able to capture a core part of the audience, then and that leads to the success metrics that you need in terms of profitability and revenue. Absolutely, that's where you can be, but it stays true to yourself, and I think that's fundamental to genuine happiness in general.
Thank you for the feedback. Again, loving this call now. How do you go about marketing your story and your brand once it's in place? Is there a format that works better for one audience as opposed to the other? Is audio better than video, or is it situational?
Very situational, and I think you've identified it quite nicely, Rick. And that's the idea of where your audience is potentially listening to your message. So if I am, I have a product that might appeal to soccer moms, and she spends most of her time in the car shuttling the kids around. Maybe it's a podcast, maybe it's something related to radio. If it's business to business, perhaps LinkedIn might be the ideal form. Social media we know is very well structured for a lot of consumer products, particularly amongst a certain younger cohort. So again, understanding who the audience is and who you're appealing to will help garner a lot of that.
Yeah.
I think that, again, the mistake a lot of people make is to think, I want to be this to everybody. And I think, based on the amount of messages out there, the number and the size of the audience, it is very difficult to be everything to everyone unless you have the money and the budget to communicate to them. So this is a perhaps a smarter way of taking care of your budget and knowing where you can focus so that you're not spending too much money trying to get the
Inordinate.
message out there.
Yeah, inordinate amounts of money in the wrong places. I've certainly done that. Now,
Yes.
tell me, let's talk about the book itself. How long did it actually take you to write your book?
I think it was certainly the byproduct of COVID. So in my city, in my country, we were locked down for a period of time. So I started taking advantage of the available time that we had being indoors to
Yep.
write every Saturday. And over the course of a year, I began putting chapters together, really articulating the process that I use for a lot of my clients. And it became an easy form to write. And so chapter by chapter, I completed it. Was very lucky in terms of getting a publisher, and here I am.
Here
But
you
it's
are.
it's a wonderful sort of way to tap into a little bit of knowledge without having to necessarily pay for the consulting fees. So I look
Yes,
upon it as a bit of a business self-help book in that way.
absolutely. Did you find the process of writing therapeutic, or was there challenges along the way? Tell us a little bit about the personal journey and what you learned about yourself.
I think I can easily be distracted. And I think that's true of a lot of people. You sit down, you have a discipline to, I'm going to try to write 1,000 words today, and it doesn't always go as planned. So I did work out a certain discipline in that regard, Rick, that I did spend the Saturday mornings working on it. But what I did was I allowed myself an extra half hour off the top to be distracted, just to do things.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
so easy to email comes in, or a YouTube video you want to watch, or a bill you have to pay. I took that first half hour and I said, okay, let's get it out of my system, take care of that. Now I can focus. And
Yep.
it became easier as a result, rather than to constantly have things in the back of my mind.
Do you have anything else planned? Are you writing any more books, do you think?
I am going to try my hand at fiction, just for the pure
Oh,
pleasure of it. But I've been very fortunate in that I've been picked up by a speakers bureau. So my focus, at least professionally, is to do keynotes and hopefully get out there and be able to connect with people on that level. But from a pure pleasure side of it, the idea of writing fiction still is sort of core to my heart. So I'd like to see if I can do that. Now that I've worked out the discipline for writing, maybe I can apply it to something that's a little bit more far-fetching in this way.
I wonder, do you enjoy listening to an audiobook now and then?
I do every now and then, but to tell you the truth, I think I enjoy the written word, and I
Yes.
think I have a huge respect for the work that goes into it. So I know people who listen to an audiobook, put it on double speed, triple speed, and just get the essence of it. But there's something beautiful about the way the writer has put the words together, and to enjoy the structure and everything that's been put together. I think from my point of view anyway, I owe it to them to spend the time that way.
Absolutely. I know that there is power in the pen. I know this as an author, and I wonder, there is a lot of aspiring authors and business owners and the likes listening into the show today, Henry, and I'm wondering if you could share a little bit of advice for somebody who's that aspiring author that wants to write a book, but they don't know the first step of writing a book. What would you tell them?
I think it's we're definitely working out a plan. So many of us who come from a business environment are quite accustomed to strategic planning, working out an execution plan. So I think if you begin with that, certainly that will help with the structure of writing in terms of mapping out all your chapters. So I think it's very much the way I see it is like a sculpture. You begin with a block of granite or a block of rock, and you're chiseling away all the in essentials until you get to the essence of what you're trying to communicate. So I think first and foremost, what is your theme that you would like to share with people? What is the sort of core idea? And that in itself, you do a little bit of research to see if anybody else has written to that. Now, how can I twist it? How can I present it a little bit differently with my take on it that might appeal to an audience? Now that you have that sort of set goal to it, now looking at that sort of fundamental approach of writing it, how do I divide this up into numerous
Numerous
chapters? So
chapters.
each week, maybe spend that time on that chapter, enhancing it, speaking to people to do the research, looking it up until you've sort of thoroughly absorbed it, and then translate it into things. Many of us have that ability to, provide advice to people or provide direction when we're asked a question, whether it's through mentoring or, through our team members, and that directing them in such a way. This is really an enhanced version of it. Getting into such detail that you're able to manifest, 40,000 words that
Yes.
come out of it.
I wonder, you touched on chapters earlier, so there's a two-part question to this now, Henry. Who is the book aimed at? Who is your best customer that should read the book? And, tell us a little bit about the content in the chapters.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So, the theme is telling your story, a professional guide to building your personal brand. And that's really the essence of it. But it's for anybody who is an entrepreneur, a founder of a company looking to take their story to market, whether it's through the product or through themselves taking it to, a pitch or what have you. It's also really helpful for a lot of people building their career, people in them and perhaps looking to ascend within their career and business, and
Yep.
looking for how they can distinguish themselves. Because quite often, we think that just doing a good job is enough and people will recognize us. But it's a fundamental belief of mine is that if you don't tell your story, nobody else will. Or if you don't tell your story, perhaps somebody else will. It may not be the story you want them to hear. So be taking control of it, understanding your story, and being able to share it in all its different forms is, I think, fundamental to standing out amongst all the competition, all the people you're facing.
That's great feedback. I think, need to get my hands on this book. So if somebody's on the call today, they want to get a copy, where they're going to find it.
Definitely on Amazon in the different forms itself. On my website, henrywong.co, you can find a number of retailers in which you could acquire it. But in each of the countries, there is a Amazon form and a different bookseller that would take it on, so you can definitely find it. But start with that if you really want to. That would be great, of course.
Of course, absolutely. If you're on today's call, you've enjoyed this call and you want to learn more about the topics that we've talked about, I'll be making sure that the links back to Henry and his wonderful book are available to you. No matter where you see the call, you're definitely going to be able to find those links. One click, go check it out. And with all that being said, Henry, I've really, really enjoyed speaking with you today on the My Future Business Show.
Thank you so much for having me, Rick. I've super enjoyed just talking to you. You have a wonderful manner about you, and I'm sure you put all your guests at ease like this.